topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the host and their guests, and not those of W4CS Radio, its employees, or affiliates. W4CS makes no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for listening to the Cancer Support Network on W4CS.com.
Everyone, and welcome to Survive and Live Well. Thanks for joining us today. As always, my goal is to empower you with information to help you regain control of your health. So we have a great show for you today, but first I want to remind you to enter your questions in the chat room and to visit my website, www.ellenjacobs.wordpress.com, for the schedule as well as for more details about my guests and their contact information. One of my favorite topics is managing our hormones naturally. Hormones are chemical messengers that travel through the body, coordinating complex processes critical to our overall health and survival. Dominance or deficiencies of these hormones leads to all kinds of medical problems. And very often, doctors overlook the importance of our hormone levels, or even to pay close attention to our complaints. If we have an ill, they give us a pill instead of correcting the root cause of the problem, which may very well be hormonal. So today we're going to talk about the different hormones, their roles, and how we can modulate those hormones using diet and supplements. Joining me is the lovely Helene Waldman. Helene is a holistic nutrition educator with a passion for helping those with breast cancer. A faculty member at Bauman College, Waldman is also a columnist, a private practitioner, and a consultant to breast cancer clinics and doctors in the San Francisco Bay Area. She's also the co-author of the Whole Foods Guide for Breast Cancer Survivors, a bestseller, and it's an integrative whole foods guide to rebuild health after surviving breast cancer and reducing the risk of recurrence. So, Helene, what a pleasure it is to have you here today.
Oh, it's so nice to be back, Ellen. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's great. It's been a while and well overdue. So, Helene, whether we realize it or not, many of us struggle with hormone imbalances, and yet many of us are just as unaware that this is fueling our ill health or even contributing to our cancer. So I thought perhaps we could start by helping people to understand the roles of our hormones and the need for balance.
Wow. Well, gosh, hormones are involved in the regulation of every body function. So that means our metabolism, sexual function, blood pressure, our immune system, our sleep and wake cycles, our memory, blood sugar balance, digestion, weight, lactation. I mean, just on and on and on and on. And as you mentioned, they basically are signals. And they signal the body to do various things. And when those signals are disrupted, the effects are profound.
Right. That's why I think it's so strange that most doctors don't clue into that, because it's just so important.
It's amazingly important. It's kind of like the traffic hub of our entire system. If you think about a network of superhighways, it's kind of like the hormones are traveling along those superhighways, carrying messages to every single part of our body.
Right. And what would happen if we shut down the superhighways and didn't let the messages go, right? Yeah.
Well, if you shut down the superhighways, or there was no cargo carrying around, or there was too much or too little, or it wasn't getting to the right place, or any of those things.
That's right.
Or if there were roadblocks all along the way, and the hormones couldn't get to where, they were disrupted and they couldn't get to where they were supposed to be.
That's right. So let's pick apart estrogen.
Estrogen. Okay.
Right, because doctors are so quick to recommend tamoxifen and aromatase inhibitors if we have hormone-sensitive breast cancer, right? But to me, that's more like ordering more water to put out the fire while you're still throwing gasoline on it. So, it may not be that we have too much estrogen, but rather that our hormones are out of balance. Maybe we have too much progesterone, or maybe we're just literally bathing and eating tons of harmful xenoestrogens. So rather than approaching that from that point of view, they say, nope, darn it, you've got estrogen-sensitive breast cancer, and we're going to give you tamoxifen.
Yeah, right. And I know that you've been doing a lot of research on tamoxifen, so I'm actually quite curious to know what you've been discovering about that. But I think you mentioned something very, very important, which is that we're not just dealing with our own estrogen. We are dealing with so many chemicals that are hormone mimics, or what we might call xenoestrogens. So, all the plastics that we come in contact with and the pesticides that we come in contact with, these are xenoestrogens. And they have a variety of different effects, none of which are pretty. I mean, they can damage the receptor sites, for our own endogenous hormones, or they can bind to our receptors and create hormone-like effects in the breast, the uterus, the prostate, even, in other species. We have seen that they have altered reproduction function in alligators and fish and frogs, and we've seen there's a wonderful book called Our Stolen Future, maybe 10 years old at this point, and it talks about the feminization of the male frogs in the Great Lakes, and how some of them don't have their normal sexual organs anymore. They might have female organs, or they might switch from male to female, or they might have both. And I think what some people also don't realize is that it's not just the individual that's affected, but the subsequent generations are affected by this disruption as well.
Because that's right, transgenerational.
This is generational, and so these disruptions are basically passed along in an epigenetic type fashion in terms of which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. And so, the next generation is affected by these hormone mimics. So I would have to agree with you that there's a vast oversimplification of this issue, because women have had lots of estrogen in their bodies for as many generations as there have been women.
Right.
That's a lot of generations.
That's right. And it didn't bother us before like it's bothering us now.
And everybody didn't have breast cancer.
Right.
You just look. I don't want to get all biblical on us, but look at the stories in the Bible. Nobody had breast cancer.
That's right. We didn't have it. Great-great-grandmother had lots of estrogen. It didn't seem to bother her any.
Yeah. So I think that there's an incredible distinction that needs to be made between natural estrogens and xenoestrogens. The other thing I think that's overlooked, quite frankly, is the fact that our own estrogen in previous generations did a very good job of leaving our bodies when it was supposed to, because our livers were able to process it. That's right. And our gut bacteria, which are intimately involved with our estrogen, because they create compounds that help. They help the glucuronidation function, and they create compounds enterolactone and enterolactase, which help us to detoxify estrogen in our bodies. So when you think about the fact that our livers are pretty clogged up with toxins and can't do as efficient a job of metabolizing the estrogen, and many of us are kind of run out of friendly flora to help down there in terms of metabolizing estrogen, then of course the system's going to get backed up.
Right. Right. And then think about the adrenals. We are all so high stress these days, right? We're trying to manage 8 different things. We've got kids, we've got, high powered jobs, or in relentless stress. We have maybe difficult relationships in our lives, and it's constant, and that stress just wears and tears on that adrenal system, and then it can't send the right hormones down the pike, so it becomes crippled.
Well, yeah, that happens, pretty much almost all the time, and I see in my life and in my practice, my personal life and in my practice, I see it pretty constantly. And, that, of course, is going to affect the thyroid, because of the adrenals and the thyroid are in a constant dance with one another. Mm-hmm. And then when the thyroid goes down, interestingly enough, when the thyroid goes down, then our supply of what's called sex hormone binding globulin goes down. And that's another hormone that helps bind up excess estrogen.
Right.
So if we don't have enough sex hormone binding globulin to help, again, control the excess estrogen, it's going to run rampant.
That's right.
So I do agree with you that certainly, estrogen historically has not been a cause of breast cancer.
Right.
But because of all the factors we've just discussed, from the xenoestrogens to the liver malfunction to the lack of gut bacteria to the down regulation of other hormonal systems, we have a logjam, basically.
That's right.
We're just not able to process it and get it out of our systems.
Right. So I guess I look at it from the point of view, let's support what nature gave us and see if we can help, correct our system and get it working back again the way it's supposed to be. Fortify that liver and support those adrenals and make sure that we're getting enough. I guess we'll, get to more of the thyroid, but make sure we're getting enough iodine in our diet and all of these things that allow our body to do what it was really meant to do, like it did so well generations ago. I'm not saying they never had cancer. None of us are saying that, but we didn't have it in the amounts that we're having now.
Yeah,
escalating rates.
Have an epidemic, and the other thing, and we can get into this if you want to, is that when the adrenals are low, it's going to throw our blood sugar regulation off. And
right.
if you want me to get into that, I can. But
you can. It's great because it all plays into it. Just like I said, if the adrenals are weak, you don't get the progesterone. You need the progesterone to offset the estrogen. It's like a snowballing effect. So absolutely, we should talk about that.
You want to talk about it now?
Good.
Well, all right. Well, I think the adrenals are always a good place to go because, I'm sure but maybe your listeners don't. What happens at menopause is that we don't stop producing estrogen. It's just that the production of estrogen kind of moves from our ovaries to our adrenal glands. So we produce smaller amounts of estrogen from our adrenal glands. So this is one of the reasons why we experience so much stress and adrenal, I won't say failure, but, adrenal fatigue and adrenal stress around menopause, because on top of all the stresses that are already affecting our adrenals, and, it's not just emotional stress. It's, skipping meals and toxic exposures and loud noises and, allergic inhalants and pollution and excessive exercise, actually. Excessive aerobic exercise is quite taxing to the adrenals. Mm-hmm. As is alcohol and caffeine and, lots of other things. Then on top of all that, we say, okay, on top of all that, now you got to make some estrogen too. And the adrenals are like, whoa! Overload. Really, give me a break.
Right.
So the adrenals, in their effort to try and keep up, they first go into hyper functionality and they start cranking out, their hormones. And two of the main hormones they crank out are epinephrine, which is adrenaline. So we feel that as irritability and stress. And also cortisol, which we also feel, as stress. And cortisol is our fight or flight hormone. So if you think about, you think about being in a dark alley and, somebody jumping out at you or a tiger or whatever it is, you think about the fact that when that fight or flight goes into effect, it's for a really good reason. It's because when we're faced with a danger, we have to get out of there, or we have to fight. We have to do something. We have to do something about that danger. Well, what do we need to be able to face that danger? We need sugar. We need to be able to move our muscles. That requires lots and lots of sugar. So our blood sugar immediately goes up so that we can respond to that threat. So here we have a situation where we're in a constant, some of us are in a constant fight or flight type of environment. And so, it's going to raise our blood sugar. Now we have another hormone, which is there to help escort blood sugar into the cells, and also to try and manage its level in the blood, because we can only stay alive with a certain level of blood sugar. Too much or too little will kill us. So the hormone insulin comes flying out of the pancreas to try and control the blood sugar. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It just depends on the person. But, in a reasonably healthy person, yes, it will lower your blood sugar. Then our bloodstreams are full of insulin. Insulin is our fat storage hormone. So insulin, we store fat. That's one of the messages that hormone delivers, store fat. So we have more insulin, we store fat. Another message that insulin delivers is grow. Grow, grow, grow. Of course, these are good things under the right circumstances.
That's right. We could grow when we were little, but we don't want to be growing now.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, in terms of breast cancer, this is exactly what we don't want.
That's
we
right.
don't want anything in there giving a signal to grow.
That's right.
So, this all is, it reminds me of when I was growing up and there was a game, I think it was called the Mousetrap or something. You put one marble.
Yeah. And it goes through the bathtub, down the chute, and down the other things, right?
Yeah. And then it does like 100 different things. Because one thing trips another thing, which trips another thing, which trips another thing. I mean, and
excellent analogy. Love it.
And so it goes, so it goes in our body. And so addressing the adrenals is so critical. And it's very unfortunate that in our medical system, the way things work are everything's an on switch or an off switch. You have adrenal disease or you don't. There's no gray.
Right.
There's no gray. Everything's black and white. So do you have Addison's disease? Let's test. Nope, you don't have Addison's disease. You're fine.
That's right. Fine line. Right. No, it really needs help. They're really fatigued, as we like to say. They don't understand fatigue. It's either works or it doesn't work,
Right. It's yes or a no. It's a black or a white. It's an on or an off.
Mm-hmm.
Even until recently, it was the same thing. It was the same thing until, several years ago with diabetes. It's like your blood sugar was 120, you're fine. 126, oops, you're not fine.
Right. Oh, you're diabetic.
Oops, you're diabetic.
Yeah, well, what happened here? We're not paying attention? Lights on, no one's home, Doc?
So, yeah, it's funny. I mean, really, it is funny that the amount of scientific intelligence that kind of exists in our world, and then we see it not being used in this kind of simplistic, just totally oversimplified fashion is sometimes mind-boggling, isn't it?
And very frustrating for patients, for everybody, because you walk into the doctor and say, "Doctor, I don't feel good." "Oh, well, what's not good?" "Oh, you're fine. That's all in your head." Well, no, you see, these symptoms are not. I'm not fine, but because they can't put a label on it and say, yes, you have Addison's or yes, you have diabetes, because they can't label it because you don't clinically have something. They're just basically blowing off all the warning signs that your body is in trouble and needs a lot of help.
Right. It doesn't meet the threshold of their definition of a quote disease, and I mean that's a whole other discussion. But that we do have a disease care system. So in order to really get any attention, you have to have a disease.
Right. It's not a healthcare system. It's a disease care system.
You can't be a millimeter away from a disease. You have to have the disease.
That's right. You have to be. That's it. It's a clinical thing, and if you don't qualify, then go home and come back when you actually have breast cancer. Come back when you actually have diabetes. But certainly don't bother me while you're trying to avoid having problems.
Exactly. Don't waste my time. Don't waste my time.
Right.
So I actually had a client yesterday, and as I was talking to her, she just kept mentioning, she mentioned, she was constipated, and then she started talking about how tired she was, and then she started talking about the fact that her hands and her feet were cold, and and I went, when was the last time your thyroid was checked? And she said, well, last year I had my thyroid checked, and my doctor told me it was borderline, and just sort of go home.
Right.
I said, well, now I'm a nutritionist, so I'm not licensed to diagnose or prescribe. And I tell all my clients that I'm not licensed to diagnose or prescribe. I said, but I just from what you're telling me, your body, what you're telling me is screaming thyroid, thyroid, thyroid. I said, she said, they won't check it again. They'll only do it whatever plan. They'll only do it every 2 years or whatever. She said they won't do it. Well, you've got every symptom in the book. What can I tell you?
Right.
You really need to go back to your doctor and get a thyroid panel. And even if your thyroid panel is normal, you have every symptom of hypothyroidism, including actually, because again, when the thyroid is low, that's going to inhibit the sex hormone binding globulin. And this particular client is actually getting pains in one of her breasts.
Mm-hmm.
Her breast is just flooded with excess estrogen because that sex hormone binding globulin is not able to bind it up and take it out.
That's right. That's right. The helpers, all the other things everything has to work in unison, in the way like a fine dance. And if one of the dance partners is gone, that lady's going to fall from the sky if there's no one there to catch her. It's just gotta have. Right, got to have the balance, got to have all the players, but that's the thing. They don't. No one really recognizes that. And even if you don't have all the symptoms, I know when my son was in the hospital one time, it was very bad. He was in the PICU for 5 days. He's 5 years old and he can't breathe. And this one doctor kept saying, well, your son has this weird virus that's going around the city. And the other one said, he doesn't have the symptoms. And she's saying, I'm telling you, this kid has it. Treat him. Second she treated him for that, started breathing, jumping around, everything was fine. Sometimes it's very confusing. You look at a list of symptoms and you say, well, they only have some of them. And, some of them could mean a lot of other things are wrong with me. But sometimes you just have to say, this is how I feel. Our gut tells us a lot of things.
I think that there's such I remember because I'm old enough to remember, when I was very little. I want to make that clear. I was very little, but I do remember when I was very young, we actually had a physician who came to our house with his little black bag.
Yeah, wasn't that neat?
Dr. Fisher, he would come to our house, and I remember my sister had scarlet fever, and he came in, and he didn't have a lot of high-tech things. He listened to her chest, and he felt her brow, and, he palpated whatever he did, but he was a hands-on person. He knew how to do that. It's an art that's been lost, and he knew how to do it. And I still remember that so fondly, And actually, it makes so much sense when you think about it. I mean, you're sick, you're impaired, you can't really function well. The doctor came to your house.
Mm-hmm. Why should you go sit in a room full of other people with diseases?
Yeah, what a wonderful concept that is.
Yeah.
So, we've definitely made a bargain with the devil in terms of all the high technology that we have to now assess, whether or not we've crossed that threshold into disease.
Right. And again, really, most doctors don't treat your symptoms. They just, they treat the tumor, let's say, but they don't treat the symptom of why you got a tumor, what was wrong with your body that you developed the tumor. They just want to take the tumor out and treat it and kill it, do everything they can to it, but they're not actually addressing what caused the tumor to form. And again, if that's the hormones, if you have a hormonal issue that's driving it, that needs to be addressed far faster than just taking out that tumor.
Well, they both need to be addressed, but
right, but you can't just.
From what I hear, and I know you work with people all the time as well, and what I always hear from clients is the tumor comes out, and either there's additional treatment or there's not, but when it's over, it's bye-bye, have a nice life.
Right. See you when it comes back. Otherwise, don't bother me.
Right, exactly. See you when it comes back.
I will be here for you.
Right. So that's where I think, people like you and me and many, many, many others, I mean, hundreds of others who like us have a very critical role to play, because when somebody, gets treated, what we want to do is we want to say, well, what was it that was going on in your body that made a hospitable situation for that to happen? And let's change that.
That's right.
Because if you take the tumor out and, quote, just go back to doing everything you were doing, well,
right.
then
Hello?
hello, yes, right. Then you have the same exact set of circumstances going on that you had that allowed the tumor to form in the first place.
That's right. You know, it's interesting too when you go through something like IVF and they determine that your hormones are not right and they correct one or the other artificially with the shot, or a cream or something. Let's say you don't have progesterone. Maybe you miscarried and no one ever told you that maybe it's because you have a progesterone deficiency. And so they fix it then, right? They fix it so you can carry that baby, but then they don't take it a step forward to say, you might want to stay on top of that. It sounds like maybe you really are lacking in this and something is maybe amiss. And while I'm certainly not advocating you go out and slap on some progesterone cream, let's see what you can do to, fix the problem, support that system so that we can get those hormones back in line. So again, there's a breakdown in the system of really supporting the body that instead of just treating that symptom.
Yeah. And of course, this, plays in very, very big time to a lot of women's concern, about weight and excess body fat and things like that. I mean, I mentioned it before, but I didn't really stress it. The fact that when our adrenals are low and our cortisol goes up and our insulin goes up, then we are getting a constant message to store fat. And there's other hormones, of course, involved as well, like leptin and adiponectin and things like that. But I think, trying to manage our blood sugar and insulin levels are critical to everything, because another consequence of this fat storage that happens when we are over insulinated, not a technical term, is that the fat cells actually then become little organelles themselves, and they start to release inflammatory chemicals like TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, and those cause low levels of inflammation throughout the body.
Right.
And inflammation, as we know from now hundreds, maybe thousands of studies, is very, very closely tied to, again, creating that hospitable environment for a breast cancer, any cancer really, to develop and also to metastasize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, this is really, these hormonal imbalances really are a train wreck. They really are.
A checklist of symptoms and say, some of these things really are bothering me. Maybe that's the problem. And we just don't get the opportunity or the doctor ear that confirms that, let's take a look. Maybe you do have a problem that we're not addressing, whether it's an iodine deficiency, a thyroid problem, whatever it is. I'm glad that you brought that up, because, we are talking about hormones, but what we really haven't gotten to is, what can we do to help build those hormones? And it's the nutrients, like you say. I mean, without iodine, we literally cannot make thyroid hormone. Can't do it because it's made, with iodine and tyrosine. And then it's converted to the active form via selenium, and there's some other nutrients involved. But literally, we need the building blocks. We need the building blocks in order to be able to do it. That's right. You got to have them. So let's talk about that. What can we do? Now we know we got a problem, or at least we know we should be aware of a problem. And, we've got these hormones that are a train wreck. So now let's see, let's talk about what can we do to fix our hormones, support them, our system to produce the hormones, I should say.
Okay. Well, I guess what we should talk about maybe first would be maybe the adrenals. Mm-hmm. Because the adrenals are so central.
Critical, right?
And it is hard. It's hard to know where to start.
No, it's a perfect start. We can talk about a couple of the foods. I happen to be a big fan of telling people to eat some more nuts and seeds, take a lot of curcumin, and definitely reduce your stress level. On the other side of it, but there's things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's
Yeah.
talk about.
Okay. Well, let's start with the adrenals. So, what do the adrenals need in order to, be as good as they can be? Well, the adrenals, in terms of nutrients, of course, everything needs everything. So we'll start with that. But what do they need on top of everything?
That's right. On top of
When I
the
say
really
everything, I
good
mean
diet.
all the nutrients. I
Right.
mean,
On top of the really good diet.
everything needs everything. But what do they need on top? Well, they particularly like pantothenic acid, which is vitamin B5. They like vitamin C, and they need good quality salt. We have a little bit of a misconception out there, just like some people still think that all fat is bad, and some people
Right.
still think that all salt is bad.
Right. And and that's again driven by our doctors. Gosh, don't eat that fat. Don't eat that salt.
Yeah. And
Good
again,
Celtic sea
it's
salt.
black and white. It's that switch thing. Everything's all bad. It's cholesterol. It's all bad. It's all good. It's all bad. It's all good. No. It's nuanced. It's
Right.
very nuanced. So certainly in salt-sensitive people, yes, there can be a problem. Mm-hmm. And also, table salt that we get from the supermarket that's been stripped of its minerals and is just sodium. Yeah, that's going to be a problem too. Mm-hmm. But if you have actually real salt that's got calcium and magnesium and potassium and sodium and chloride and phosphorus and all the minerals that are supposed to be in balance in our body, and you eat them in a balanced form, well, that's a different thing.
That's right.
That's a different thing. So the adrenals need those basic nutrients. Now, there is actually a compound called royal jelly, which is really fascinating. It's actually made by bees, and only the queen bee gets to eat it, though. That's why it's called royal jelly. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like a honey, but a super duper honey, superfood honey.
Right.
And it's for the queen bee. Only the queen bee gets to eat it. And of course, she gets to be 30 times the size of the other bees, or something like that.
Well, I don't think most of us want to get 30 times the size of another woman, but, I'm with you.
Oh, yeah, okay, maybe we don't like that analogy, but she gets to be powerful, is
right.
really the analogy here. She gets to be powerful. So there's something quite wonderful in the royal jelly, and it is very, very rich in pantothenic acid. We know that. So that may be a big part of it. And there may be other constituents of it that we're not as familiar with. Very, very supportive to the adrenal glands. And then there's a whole class of herbs that are known as the adaptogens. And the adaptogens have an affinity for creating homeostasis or balance. And what fascinated me when I first started to learn about adaptogens was learning about where these plants grow. Because plants like Arctic rose and rhodiola and Siberian ginseng, Siberia, these are plants that have to adapt to very harsh environments.
Right.
One of the things that I just think is so incredible and I love about plants is that they develop certain characteristics based upon the stresses that they're exposed to. So these class of plants have to adapt to very, very harsh environments, and then they benevolently pass those adaptive qualities onto us when we consume them. And I just think that's just magnificent.
I think so too. I love taking my adaptogens. It's so easy too. It's not like I have to eat something that doesn't taste good or is inconvenient. It's really easy.
Yeah. So, I'll tell you the ones that I really like, and then you probably have some of your own that you really like, but I think holy basil is absolutely wonderful.
Absolutely.
It's called also Tulsi is the name of the plant, and it's called holy, and it's an Ayurvedic herb, and it's called holy basil in Ayurveda because it is revered. It's a revered adaptogen. It helps to lower cortisol levels. That's one of its major things. It nourishes the adrenals. Another one that's quite wonderful is ashwagandha.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Ashwagandha is another herb, as I mentioned. Siberian ginseng is another
Rhodiola.
one. Rhodiola is another one. Schisandra is another one. And then there are some formulas, and I'm not I would defer to the experts on this because this is not my area of expertise, but there are formulas that actually include adrenal glandular components.
Right.
And I know that sometimes, they are very, very helpful for some people. As I say, it's not my area, so I'm going to leave that to the people who specialize in that as to whether or not someone is a good candidate for those.
That's right. And I would like to just caution everybody that before you start taking herbs, you need to really work with somebody, an expert on it, because some of them can be taken with other drugs. Let's say you're doing chemo or you're doing you're taking tamoxifen. If you are taking some of these drugs, there are some contraindications with the herbs, so you need to work with a specialist on this.
Yes.
Some are supportive, and some of them definitely you don't want to take together. So
yes,
make sure you don't do it on your own.
That's a really good point, and it is really important. And I think what it does, actually, in kind of a funny way, because in our society, in our medical establishment, anything that's not allopathic is kind of put down. Well, nothing could be
Right.
that powerful, aside from our medicines. And yet, at the same time, they're saying, no, don't take the herbs. Well,
right. And they don't know. It's out of ignorance. And I don't mean that in a mean way. It just means they're not trained in it. So they
but
just
what
say
I'm
no.
saying is obviously the herbs have some power. I mean, you can't at the same time say, oh, the herbs are useless, but don't take them because they might interact with the medication. I mean, make up your mind. And I think clearly the second is the truth. The herbs are very powerful, and that is why you do need to work with somebody knowledgeable, because there are herbs that are going to upregulate or downregulate, for example, your detoxification pathways in your liver. And that's going to affect how a drug works in you, because a drug is designed to basically be in your system for a certain amount of time and then get the heck out of there.
Right.
Right? So if you're taking an herb that's going to keep things in your system longer, that could make the drug toxic. Or if you're taking herbs that are going to get things out of your system sooner, then the drug might not work.
That's right. And so it really is important.
So it's very, very important, and I'm really glad you raised that point, because these are not things that people should do casually. Although I will say, having said that, I will say that the adaptogens are sort of a very foundational kind of herb, and in my experience, I have not heard of them particularly interrupting anything else, because they're really sort of what one of my very favorite herbalists, Donna Yans, would call sort of foundational support.
I love them too, yeah.
Just trying to get your body into balance. They're not, it's not like golden seal, which is really an herbal antibiotic, or, kava kava, which is, a very potent sedative. I mean, there's some herbs that are really, like St. John's wort, which is going to interact with SSRIs and other medications. So yes, you
Yes.
do need to be very, very careful, but don't be paranoid.
Don't be paranoid unless you are taking a drug like tamoxifen. I think it's Shoshana, one of the you absolutely should not to be taking, and they're few and far between. But if you're not taking any prescription drugs, then these are really, not one size fits all necessarily, but probably a very good idea for everybody. So before we run out of time, we better talk a little bit more about what else we can do, even if we don't get into
how much
detail
time
on
do we have?
We have 8 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Time
So that's what I
flies.
say. Before we better get on to a few more things.
Okay, well, I think that we probably want to talk about insulin and blood sugar then, because that is so foundational, again, to everything. And one of the problems is that I think we've lost our way, really, in terms of eating. In terms of thinking that. What do I want to say? That products, that food-like, as Michael Pollan would say, that food-like products
Yes.
that are on the shelves of the grocery store are actually food, and they're not.
That's right.
And one of as far as insulin goes, and if we're hormonally speaking, what gets our insulin so out of control are refined sugars. And we have refined sugars everywhere we look. They're called corn syrup, they're called corn sweetener, high fructose corn syrup, dextrin, inverted sugar, barley malt, sucrose, just all of these things. They are all different forms of sugar. And I have some stats here which are old. I mean, they're about 15 years old at this point, but I'm looking in the late 90s. We had the per capita consumption of sugar was 155 pounds per person per year.
Gross.
So, when I look at numbers like that, and I'm sure that was a while ago, so it wouldn't surprise me if that's, way
Far
over
larger. Yeah.
Right, way bigger now. But when I look at that and I figure that maybe I eat 2 pounds of that, a year, I go, wow, well, those 153 are, I don't know who's eating those additional 153. But
that's right.
Somebody is.
Exactly.
So, we're just, again, and the human body was not designed to eat refined sugar. Even in the cane fields, even the cane workers, their teeth rotted, that's for sure. But they didn't become diabetic because actual cane, the sugar cane, is full of chromium, which is a sugar handling, it's one of our major sugar handling nutrients. And so, even the plants that are very, very sweet, nature gave to us with the additional nutrients to help metabolize that sugar. So we were never meant to eat sugar in isolation. We were never meant to drink 12 ounces of straight sugar, which of course is what a soda is. And quite frankly, that's what fruit juice is as well.
That's right.
Because we were meant to actually eat fruit, which includes fiber and other things that help slow down that sugar rush in our system.
Right. Even breads. The body thinks when you eat bread, it thinks it's eating sugar. It just raises those.
Yeah, we weren't meant to eat grains that the bran layer, the outside layer, and the germ layer, the inner layer, were refined out of.
Right.
So all we had was the sugar, the endosperm, which is the sugar layer. We just weren't meant to do that. So the first thing that people need to realize is that if you eat refined carbohydrates, that is sugar. And what that's going to do is it's going to wreak havoc on your body, and it's going to raise your insulin levels. And over time, what happens is your pancreas just puts out so much insulin, and then eventually diabetes happens because it poops out. It just can't do it anymore.
Right.
I am tired. I can't do this anymore. And that's when you're in really, really, really big trouble, and you've got 100 pounds of excess weight because you've had all this excess insulin for all these years storing fat. And, eventually, if that just goes unchecked, you become an insulin-dependent diabetic. So, one of the first things we need to think about is that these are not foods. These are not foods. So everything that we eat should be a real food, and that means that in the form that nature gave it to us. So if it's a fruit, then we should eat the whole fruit. If it's a grain, then we should eat the whole grain. Mm-hmm. One of the other basics that I talk to people about all the time is that, protein and fat are natural ways of sort of counteracting the sugary effects of carbohydrates. Again, it's not rocket science. This is what nature gave to us. 3 macronutrients: protein, fat, carbohydrates. We need them all.
We need them all. We need good ones. We need them all, right?
If you strip the fat out of things, my goodness, then you are. You're making a big mistake. We would say that. But, you are taking away one of your best weapons for helping to regulate blood sugar, and you're also taking away one of your best friends, if it's a good healthy fat, like an omega-3 fat or avocado or olive oil, monounsaturated fat. You're taking away your best friends to help manage inflammatory responses in the body. So I would say to folks, please. When you see a product that says fat-free, I don't know if I can say this on the air or not. I guess we're not regulated by the FCC here, so I can. But I saw a poster the other day, which was great. It said, "When you see the label fat-free, think chemical shitstorm."
Exactly. I was going to say, you're getting a chemical substitute for what is is a good thing. Instead, you're putting in junk that is detrimental to your health.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's very important to understand what's a good fat and what's an unhealthy fat. And I was encouraged, as I'm sure you were, to hear the other day that the FDA finally decided that trans fats have no use in human health or something like that. I don't know what the wording was.
Of course, I fear what they're going to put in replacement now.
Yeah, I know. I have
thought the same thing.
I know. I thought the same thing. Okay, what are we going to have now? Better than trans fats, better than margarine. Can't believe it's not margarine.
Right. Ban high fructose corn syrup and give us corn sugar, they call it. Try to hide in food. But,
I mean,
don't eat buttery Benecol. Yeah, that's the way to do it. Eat margarine. It's good for you.
Yeah, right. We'll have to see how that plays out. But right. But preliminarily, it looks good. So protein, healthy fats, complex. Keep your life simple, and your carbs complex is another saying that we like.
Right, eat responsibly. Know that everything that goes in your body either hinders or helps your health, and do talk to somebody like Helene. Helene, to talk about different supportive supplements. I talk about that all the time with my clients, things that can really help you in amounts that you probably could never eat on your own, like curcumin, right? That's fantastic. It's good for the adrenals. It's good for anti-cancer. It's good for a million things, but could you really eat enough?
Yeah. And also one of my favorites, and I won't let you let me go until I mention it.
Well, I won't. Go ahead.
Flax seeds.
Oh, that's my favorite.
Oh my goodness. I mean, you've got the omega-3 fats, you've got lignans. When those lignans combine with your gut bacteria, they create these fantastic compounds that help you detoxify estrogen. Flax has been shown in HER2, I'm sure you know, Ellen, in HER2 to downregulate the HER2 new protein in HER2 positive tumors by like around 75%. That's an approximation. I mean, flax is really
huge. And it's such a controversial item, and unfortunately we don't have time to debate it, but I am 100% with you. Everyone worries about it being a phytoestrogen, but it actually, if you have too much estrogen, it'll help your estrogen levels drop. And I mean, it's just so good. And we're going to have a whole conversation again, Helena, on flaxseed, because I think it's that important. But unfortunately, we're out of time. So thank you very, very much for joining me today. And maybe we'll do a little follow-up post, you and I, and talk about this some more.
Okay.
And
great, Ellen.
I would enjoy that.
So much fun. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So folks, this has been Survive and Live Well, Tips to Treat and Beat Cancer on Cancer Support Network, W4CS.com, where you can listen Tuesdays at 1 p.m. If you missed any part of this show, you can catch it on my website, www.ellenjacobs.wordpress.com. Join us next Tuesday when we get updates from Dr. Kathleen Ruddy on the first preventive vaccine for breast cancer. This is your host, Ellen Jacobs, one-on-one cancer coaching, empowering you to treat and beat cancer. See you next week.